Thing on. All right. Wasn't that great?
Yes.
All right. I'm Scott Horton. I'm from the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com. And I've been interested in WikiLeaks and the Julian Assange case for many years now. I can't believe that this is still a controversy, that this guy's still locked up in 2023, and we haven't figured out a way to fix it yet. But I guess that's why we're here. So I wanted to say a few things before we get to y'all's questions and answers. First of all, I interviewed Julian Assange back in 2010 a couple of times, or in 2011, right during the outbreak of the Arab Spring, which, had its mixed results, but had its positive points too, and really was started by WikiLeaks and some of the revelations in there. It was about the State Department cables regarding Tunisia that kicked it all off. And now, so the film shows that at this point in the appeals process, he won the last round, but the US government and the British government are still appealing. And so, the fight is still on to see whether he'll be prosecuted on the Espionage Act or not. The movie really focuses on the fight to get him free, but there's a point in there where Nils Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, talks about how Assange never really wanted this to be about him. It was all about transparency and leaking these documents, providing a place for whistleblowers to tell the truth to the public. So I just wanted to go over a couple of Assange's greatest hits and Manning's greatest hits from especially the major leak from 2010. First of all, on the Iraq cables, the Glaspie memo from July 25th, 1990, when April Glaspie told Saddam Hussein, go ahead and invade Kuwait, see if we care, which they had covered up for years and years and was finally revealed by WikiLeaks. The secret Iraq death toll, they said, we don't do body counts, but they were lying, they did, and they were deliberately lying about how many people they knew that they had killed by more than 15,000 in Iraq War II. Also, Frago 242, that's Fragmentary Order 242, which said that, and this is long after Abu Ghraib was revealed, Frago 242 said, well, if the Bada Brigade and Wolf Brigade are torturing Sunnis to death, that's okay, you need to look the other way. It was an order to the military to continue to cooperate in torture. That's part of what inspired Manning to leak the documents in the first place, was then Bradley Manning was being made to participate in the booking of a guy who was guilty of nothing more than writing a newspaper article about the Prime Minister, and who was sure to be taken off to be tortured and maybe killed. That was why Manning decided to go first to the Post and the Times that rejected his leak, and then ultimately to WikiLeaks to tell that story. Of course, the collateral murder video, which you saw there, and very importantly, there's a document about a war crime committed earlier in the war, but that was revealed in 2011, about how soldiers had murdered this entire family, including a baby, at point-blank range, and then called in an airstrike to try to cover it up. But the airstrike hit the wrong part of the house, and so investigators did come and find the proof, but they buried it all. But this was finally revealed in 2011, and this helped solidify the Iraqi government's case for kicking America out and refusing to sign the new Status of Forces Agreement, allowing the United States to stay. I'm sorry, it's taking too long. Afghanistan, they were lying about the civilian casualties, and the documents proved it. They were lying about the endemic corruption of the government in Kabul that they knew was fatal. It meant that the state that they were trying to build there was absolutely corrupt and could not stand without America's support, and they knew it, as well as our supposed allies, the Pakistanis, next door's role in backing the Afghan Taliban. They also leaked, Manning also leaked these documents from the State Department where they talked about the siege in the Gaza Strip. And now the policy was to keep the Palestinians on a diet, hungry but not starving, they said. And that was revealed in the documents, as well as pressure by the Barack Obama administration and the Hillary Clinton State Department on the government of Spain to drop their war crimes investigations against George Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and the principals who had lied us into the Iraq War. And hilariously, the Obama government said, "We're investigating, so you don't need to," and denied their universal jurisdiction there. And then on the State Department cables, it was revealed that an executive vice president from Citigroup in Chicago picked Barack Obama's cabinet, including said, Hillary's going to be your Secretary of State, you're going to keep Robert Gates at Defense, you're going to take Goldman Sachs for Treasury, and all the way down the line. They talked about, revealed that the Yemeni government was covering up American drone strikes that killed civilians in Yemen. Revealed, again, the Tunisia corruption that kicked off the Arab Spring. That the Yukiya Amano, the new head of the IAEA, was a toady and a tool and would do whatever they said, unlike his predecessor, Mohammed el-Baradei. American support for the bloody coup in Honduras in 2009. And the truth that Georgia started the war against South Ossetia in 2008. And seriously, I mean this, thousands and thousands and thousands more stories like that. You go on Guantanamo files, but, well, Google's kind of broken now, but there was a time where if you just Googled State Department cables confirm, or State Department cables reveal, or WikiLeaks show, you get tens of thousands of results from all across this planet, because America's the world empire. The State Department cables involve virtually every country on the planet. And this is the most important thing that happened in journalism in the last generation. There's just no question about it. And then, of course, the DNC leaks got Julian Assange in trouble with the Democrats because it showed how they rigged the game against Bernie Sanders. It also showed the Pied Piper strategy. This was in the Podesta emails. This is where the Clintons asked their media friends to promote Donald Trump because they thought he would be easier to beat in the general election. This didn't work out too well for them that time. But this is a strategy that they continue to use and to some positive effect, including in House races, supporting the winger, even donating to the winger in the primary because he's easier to beat in the general. That's the strategy, but it blew up in their face, and the WikiLeaks revealed it there in 2016. And by the way, and you should know this because I don't know what you know about this, but it's very important, that CrowdStrike admitted that they had no evidence whatsoever that the Russians were the ones who had supposedly, quote unquote, exfiltrated that data from the DNC server. None. And in the Robert Mueller report, they claim no chain of custody to WikiLeaks from whoever leaked it to WikiLeaks. In other words, every word that you have ever heard uttered about how it's some kind of known fact that Russia was behind that leak is just a lie. The whole thing was a hoax. And to this day, nobody knows who leaked it, other than Craig Murray. You saw in the video there, he told me on the show that he knows who leaked it. And it was no one that had anything to do with Russia whatsoever. That's believable compared to the lies about it. And then there's Vault 7, where they prove that the CIA is violating our rights, spying on us just as bad as the FBI and the National Security Agency, and on like that. But anyway, the real point here is, as you heard stipulated in the film, Assange is a publisher and journalist. He is a leak-e, not a leaker. So he's never signed any confidentiality agreement, and he's not an American. So the only reason that he's under American jurisdiction at all is simply because our government claims so, even though they have no real right to. But as long as they do claim power over him, then that makes him a U.S. person. And that means he's protected by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and that means that he has the right to publish whatever the hell he wants. It's as simple as that. The problem is this, though. Woodrow Wilson, hold your booze for time. Woodrow Wilson's Espionage Act is written so broadly that it can include us for sharing WikiLeaks in our emails with our friends. But the problem is, the thing about it is the Justice Department's never tried to push it that far. And they've never prosecuted or even really, I don't think successfully, or really tried to prosecute a leak-e for publishing this information. Although they've gone very hard after leakers, especially in the Obama years. But so when they talk about in the movie where you saw people saying that this would set such an important precedent, there's no way to exaggerate that. If this guy was convicted in an American court of espionage and the Supreme Court would uphold it, there would be in American history, the time before the case of U.S. versus Assange and the time after. And in the time after, it goes to show that the government can prosecute journalists for publishing secrets that they don't like. And so that is the biggest deal of all. It changed all of American history and where we're headed. So with that, I actually want to now finally switch to asking you guys questions here, and start with you, if I could, Gabriel. If you could explain a little bit about what they called that New York Times test in the Obama years, where they decided not to prosecute your brother, and then what happened in the Trump years where they changed that argument and continued through now into the Biden years to say that, in fact, they're going to go ahead now.
Well, I think it was Eric Holder was the Attorney General under Obama, and they, were looking at ways, how can we go after WikiLeaks? They looked at the Espionage Act, and they even had a grand jury, I think, at the time, and a secret one. And they came up with this New York Times problem, which was that we could not charge WikiLeaks with publishing this information without doing the same thing to the New York Times. And so that meant that this prosecution didn't move forward, and Julian spent some 7.5 years inside the Ecuadorian embassy. It was only after 2017 when Mike Pompeo did his first speech as CIA director. He basically dedicated the whole thing to WikiLeaks. It was just after the Vault 7 leaks that embarrassed him and the CIA incredibly, because they couldn't keep a hold of their tools, the tools that they were using. So they're totally embarrassed around the world, as well as showing that they'd been monitoring people illegally, tapping into people's televisions to listen to them in their homes, their phones, and things like that. So it was during that speech that Pompeo called WikiLeaks a non-state hostile intelligence service, which was something new, that nobody ever heard this before. They didn't know what he was talking about. But later on was discovered what that meant was that they could use clandestine operations against WikiLeaks, similar to what they would use against, say, the Iranian intelligence agencies. And so that's when we saw, you see in the film, this surveillance footage from inside the embassy. So around that time, there's a little bit about it in the film, that the company that was supposed to be protecting Julian was co-opted by the CIA. And the CEO of that company did over 100 flights. Every 15 days, he would fly to the US with this material and drop it off. In emails to his staff, he emailed them, said, "We're now working for the dark side." And so this was all revealed by these leakers who were employees for that company, who saw what was going on. And so there's an ongoing investigation in Spain now, a judicial investigation into the CEO and his role in the surveillance of Julian's privileged meetings with his doctors, lawyers, etc., inside the embassy. This was all confirmed by a report by these 3 journalists in Washington, D.C. that came out at the end of 2021, a 6,000-word report. They investigated for over a year, 30 intelligence community sources, both current and former, confirming that this surveillance emanated from within the CIA, but it was actually worse, that there were plots to kidnap Julian that made it all the way to the Trump White House. And this report said that in these conversations with the DOJ and Pompeo, our CIA director, they said, "Well, what are you going to do with him if you kidnap him? Wait a while and we'll get some charges together so that, once you get him out of the embassy, we can charge him with something." And so that's sort of the genesis of these charges now that we've seen, is this judicial kidnapping that happened of Julian Assange. I mean, Pompeo has claimed credit for it in his recent memoir, saying that he successfully lobbied the Ecuadorian embassy to have Julian kicked out. That it was, this is the sort of thing that he's proud of in his time serving as CIA Director and Secretary of State.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And wasn't it that someone at CIA or someone involved in the meetings went to Congress, and was how the story came out, that they're plotting on murdering this guy?
Yeah, I think there were reports. I'm not sure of that, but there were reports from within the leakers from this company that they had looked in how to poison Julian. So those came out of there. I'm not sure of the sourcing. I only know from this report, but you might know more than me about the congressional side.
Well, I was going from the Andrew Coburn report in Harper's recently. He talked about apparently they were having these discussions, and somebody said, boy, this is going too far, and went and talked to Congress about it, I guess was how it started out. But that's the Ithaka report in Yahoo News is what he's talking about there for people who want to look at that. So can you talk, John, a little bit about Assange's treatment, Julian's treatment in the Belmarsh prison? I know that originally he was being treated under very harsh conditions, so-called suicide precautions, 23 hours a day, locked down and all that. Is that still the case? Is the situation quite a bit better now?
Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for the wrap-up, Scott. It's great, the intro. Well, it's a maximum security prison. The long and short of it is that Julian's held incommunicado. No, he can't even go to his own court hearings nowadays. He makes an application and they don't let him go. So that's the general outlook. The specific outlook to his daily life is 23 hours in a cell. He's in a small cell. Up until the end of the beginning of 2020, he was held in the health wing, which is called by the prisoners the hell wing. Interestingly, moving Julian from the hell wing to what they call in association, the over 50s group, although he wasn't over 50 at the time, was brought about by 3 petitions from the prisoners. 1 failed, they petitioned again. 2 failed, they petitioned again. The 3rd petition from the prisoners, not from Human Rights Watch or Asylum International or all of those other bodies that hold themselves up as defenders of our rights. It was the prisoners in the prison who brought about a little bit of sensible treatment of Julian Assange. I'd like to get principally to the meat and gravy, of this matter, particularly in the United States. You have 2 things that make the United States outstanding. One is from sea to shining sea. The other is the Constitution, and particularly in the Constitution, the amendments 1 to 10, which constitute the Bill of Rights. In the beginning, number 1, the First Amendment, the government will make no laws. It's categorical. The destruction, the blighting, the truncating, the removal of the privilege of not the privilege, that's the wrong word, the removal of the right, the fundamental right of every American citizen to access opinion and to exchange opinion between themselves, and as a consequence of that, fulfill the necessity of knowledge in their families, within themselves, within your friends, and within your community, and as a consequence, within the Congress, within the state congresses and the federal Congress, founded upon the exchange of knowledge made possible by the First Amendment. Every citizen, except of course those in Washington, D.C., in the air they breathe in and the air they breathe out contains the culture of the First Amendment. And now we see in the, what's that called again? the Twitter files, the twit files released by Matt Taibbi, the Stanford Observatory, dedicated, along with the Vitality Project and many others, to facilitating the FBI, the CIA, Homeland Security, CDC, HIH, all of them, to truncate and remove the capacity for people to read other people's tweets on Twitter. It's a bloody scandal so deep into the culture of the United States, and it's exemplified by applying 1917 Espionage Act to Julian Assange, who's simply a publisher and wasn't the first to publish, by the way, all of that information that so scandalises these people. The cables published in their entirety by John Young, Krypton, Krypton.org, a website housed in New York. He's left alone. The partners, the original partners, turned on Julian, and then just recently in November realised what fools they were to turn on Julian, and released a letter signed by the publishers, Ken Salzberger, not the journalists, the publishers of the New York Times, the publishers of The Guardian, the publishers of Der Spiegel, the German newspaper, the publishers of Le Monde, the French newspaper, the publishers of El Pais, the Spanish newspaper. All of those original partners in the publication realised after all these 10 years that if Julian Assange is destroyed by the application of the Espionage Act, they are destroyed. The other day, Robert Kennedy, who you couldn't ask for a more convicted patriot to the United States, their family's been in the centre of it. You might disagree with this, that and the other, what he says, but that's the privilege of the First Amendment. He can write it and we can disagree with it. He released a tweet. Without a free press, there's no United States. Without a free Julian Assange, there's no free press. The first sentence, without a free press, there's no United States. What does it mean? What are you left with, citizens of the United States? What are you left with? Ask the question and answer it for yourself. If the free press is removed for you, what do you describe the United States as in those circumstances if there's no free press? So I ask you humbly, or not humbly, modestly, to join with us and bring about the essential iconographic freedom of Julian Assange, which will bring about a renewal of the approach of the federal authorities to the to the rights in the Bill of Rights, 1 to 10, specifically, numero uno.
All right, I got one or two more questions, but I'm going to hold them and let you guys have your turn. Who's up first?
Hi.
Let me trade mics with you a second.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. My name is Angela McArdle. We chatted a little bit. It's great to see you in person. I'm wondering if you can describe a little bit of the filmmaking process, some of the highlights and some of the pain points.
Well, if you ever want to find out more about your family, you should make a documentary about them. you know, this was a very personal project, and you know, I'm a film producer. I usually produce scripted drama films. This is the first documentary I've ever done before, but I think probably what we faced, the hardest part was getting the film to people, you know, getting it out to people, financing it, getting through all these levels of gatekeepers that exist within the film distribution, you know, broadcasters, distribution and funding landscape. And so that was probably my main challenge, getting this financed and to the audiences. You know, we sort of, you know, John's sitting right here, but we, you know, I'd like to call John and Stella our Trojan horse in that sense. That when we set out to make this film, you know, we knew that we would encounter resistance if it was a film about Julian. That we wouldn't be able to get money to make it. We wouldn't be able to get it on, say, the Australian public broadcaster where the film is today. And so that was a big hurdle that we had to get over. And we pitched the film hundreds of times to every platform, to, you know, every broadcaster, and it was always, you know, no, no, no. And then eventually when we had a cut of the film, they would watch it, and, you know, particularly in Australia, they're like, oh, this isn't about Julian, this is about John and Stella. And then so that would bring down the barriers for us. So that was a really big challenge. One of the joys was working with great director, great DOP, who's right here now, Niels Ludefog, our editor, Karen Johnson. You know, we had an amazing team who really pulled this all together. We had 240 days of footage, and Karen, our editor, spent 6 months just watching all this stuff. I think she must know more about John than he knows about himself, maybe. But yeah, it was working with that amazing team to bring this to you guys. So that was probably the most satisfying part.
Thank you.
John, you want to take a crack at that one too?
Well, you know, this film speaks for itself, really. Always end up in a position up here with a microphone and a group of people that know more about me and I know nothing about them. It's sort of like shameful, really, to put my head in a bag. But, you know, the people were a pleasure to work with. I mean, Ben was a pest, you know, the director, because, you know, you can hint at, no, I don't want to go any further with this, but he keeps on persisting. And like the Grand Inquisitor in Dostoevsky's novel Crime and Punishment, eventually their own internal psychology allows you to confess. For some reason, I don't understand it, but that's how it goes. That was the feeling that his persistence and gentle conjuring allowed me to reveal things that normally you wouldn't say.
It sure is good to see his father and his wife sticking up for him like this and working this hard. Do you want to say a word about Stella?
Oh, Stella's wonderful, you know. She's got those 2 children. She manages interview after interview. She, in the beginning, and that's back when that film was made, she'd only, I think, done 1 interview, and she really not a public person whatsoever, but as the necessity to fight for her husband and the successful penetration into cultural consciousness that she's managed to manifest and bring about. She's revealed herself as the most extraordinary woman for whom I have an undying admiration and affection.
Anybody else? Oh, we're out of time? Yeah, we're out of time. All right, well, sorry, I took up too much at the beginning there.
No, thank you everybody for coming. It's a delight to be
Thank
with
you guys very much.
you.
Just if on your way out, there's a small table out there. If you do one thing, please pop your email down.